This video was brought to you by my amazing patrons over on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community, which has perks including a Patreon Discord, monthly recommendation lists, care packages and more, then the link is in the description. I've just taken the plunge and gone full-time doing YouTube and some other creative things which are going to be announced very soon, so your support over there quite literally makes these videos happen. Okay, so this video has been a long time coming. For a while, Rowan Ellis asexuality was the top search term involving my name on YouTube, and that was before I'd made a single video on the topic. So today I'm going to be giving the people what they want. Honestly, I was putting this off because, let's be real, for a long time there wasn't a whole lot of asexual representation to look at. And I haven't been about that under 10-minute video life for a while now. Plus, just because I'm a stressed out little asexual lesbian doesn't mean I'm going to be interested in every ace character that pops out of the woodwork. But over the past few years, asexual representation has been gaining momentum. This emergence of characters across different shows and movies who seem to be asexual, whether it's explicitly labelled in canon or not, has led to an increase in awareness of the sexual orientation in the mainstream. We've had representation appear in cartoons, soaps, comedies, and more. This has the potential to create a modest but not insignificant snowball in the coming years, with showrunners and writers who previously had no idea that asexuality even existed, including the experiences in their writing and potentially allowing asexual creators more understanding and openness when pitching their own stories of their own identities. But as this video will show, there's still a long way to go. I went into writing this script worried that I wouldn't have enough to say for a whole video, when in fact I managed to have too much to say, so I'll be making a follow-up video to this about some common problems around asexual representation. Both videos are totally standalone, so you don't have to have watched both. But I guess if you're new to this channel and you like this video, then consider subscribing to make sure you see that second one as well. So partly because of this lack of representation in the mainstream, combined with our woefully lacking sex education system and general cultural assumptions around sex, I'm sure there'll be some people watching this video who might have heard of asexuality but aren't entirely sure what it actually means. So I thought it would be pretty useful to start off by quickly addressing the question, what is asexuality? With the understanding that labels can broadly describe identities but don't necessarily need to strictly define them. Two people who both identify as asexual may have different experiences or feelings towards sex, sexual attraction or desire. Asexual is an umbrella term that covers a wide range of feelings, experiences and identities. I feel like I'm being very queer big sister, everyone's valid here, but I do think it's worth saying. At its core, being asexual means experiencing little to no sexual attraction. Sexual attraction is generally about being attracted to a specific person that then leads to a desire for sexual contact with that person. Asexual is not the same as aromantic. Those are two different things. You can be both or neither or only one. Being aromantic is about, as the name suggests, lack of romantic attraction. There are different types of attraction, but for many people who aren't asexual or aromantic, these might kind of come together just as one big package that align with itself. Many people, for example, would see their sexual and romantic attraction to be intrinsically linked. You might also have things like aesthetic attraction, so attraction based on the way that someone looks, or sensual attraction, a desire for touching and holding in a way that isn't necessarily sexual. So you might experience none of these types of attraction, or a mixture of them. Asexual people might also identify as gay, straight, bi, aromantic, questioning, queer, or otherwise. People who identify as asexual can be in relationships with emotional, sensual, or romantic components to it. They might even have sex in that relationship or outside of it. And I know that if you've only ever heard of asexuality in a very simple passing way, like asexual equals no sex, then that can be confusing. But look, humans are complicated little flesh beings, and Plato's perfect form of an identity doesn't exist, nor should it. And to be honest, it's exactly these potentially complicated relationship negotiations and internal confusions that would be perfect in works of fiction. What does it look like when someone who's asexual falls for someone who considers sex to be a vital part of their life? How do you come out to your family and friends when they haven't even heard of the word asexual? How do you deal with feeling like you'll never find that special someone in the way that every movie, show and advert for jewelry says you should? If we're being cynical and a little sassy about it, there are some writers out there who could probably benefit from having to think of more interesting character motivations and dramas than ones that are just purely about sex, whether that's about losing your virginity or cheating on your spouse. I made a video a little while ago on my channel with the author Alice Oseman about myths around asexuality and aromanticism, so if you're interested in learning more about these identities themselves, then you can check out that video. But in this video though, I want to focus on the way that this identity has been depicted on screen. What counts as representation? Usually my working parameters for genuine representation is that it has to be understandable and undeniable to its target audience. So for example, if you have a gay character in a kids movie, but it's kept vague and kids themselves wouldn't necessarily pick up that they're meant to be gay, then to me, that's not genuine representation. So with that in mind, it would seem like these videos would look at, only examples where there is no mistaking that this character is asexual, either through stating directly and using the word, or giving a description of the experiences or feelings of being asexual when the world itself wouldn't allow saying the word to be possible, so in period dramas, for example. However, as you will soon see, we aren't quite in a position to do that yet. If you were to only look at asexual representation where the word itself is used, it would still be an extremely short video. For all the progress that we've had, asexual representation is very much behind the times. And so this restrictive definition of genuine representation doesn't necessarily work for asexuality right now. Instead, we're in the period of taking the first steps towards meaningful leading role representation. And the history of asexuality on screen is a mix of genuine success, dangerous stereotypes, and missed opportunities, and more. So let's delve back into the annals of history to look at a somewhat comprehensive timeline of asexuality. The timeline. A surprising number of people seem to think that asexuality is this kind of modern invention, or that asexual history exists separately from queer history, but neither of these things is true. People have been identifying as asexual for over 100 years, and before that there were people who might have used the term, but who definitely expressed some, shall we say, asexual identifiers. Like being gay or bi or any other sexuality for that matter, asexual people didn't just pop out of nowhere in the modern era, but with historic ideas of sex being so closely tied to ideas like the institution of marriage or nationalistic ideas of procreation or what is your worth as a person, it's not surprising that we might find it difficult to see open and honest documentation of asexual figures in history. So because asexuality feels so opposed to these ideas of a so-called normal life, when we do see it crop up historically, it's often in medical setting. Since at least the 1800s, medical professionals have recorded people who express little or no interest in sex, but for a long time this was viewed purely through a pathological lens, being labelled as hypoactive sexual desire disorder, sexual coldness, or sexual anesthesia. During the same century, in the 1869 pamphlet by Carl Maria Kurtbeny, where the terms hetero and homosexual were thought to originate, the term monosexual also appears. The word refers to people who only masturbate rather than have sexual encounters with others, the idea being that monosexual people have no interest in or need for sexual intercourse with other people. I've done a whole video about the difficulties of tracing queer history, and asexuality is no exception. There's a speech that was only unearthed in 2019, for example, by Reverend Carl Schlegel, who historian Jonathan Ned Katz cites as the earliest known US homosexual emancipation activist. In the speech from 1907, Schlegel speaks out in a cry for liberation. Let the same laws for all the intermediate stages of sexual life, the homosexuals, heterosexuals, bisexuals, asexuals, be legal as they are now in existence for the heterosexuals. This took until just 2 years ago to come to light, and is seemingly one of the first recorded uses of the word asexual. The famous sexologist Magnus Hirschfeld talks of the phenomenon in the decade before this, but didn't use that specific word at the time. And then in the 40s, we get the Kinsey scale, a scale which ranges from 0, meaning exclusively heterosexual, to 6, meaning exclusively homosexual, which uses X to acknowledge people who experience no sociosexual contacts or reactions, and are therefore outside of this scale altogether. An article in Slate by Michael Waters, looking at archival evidence for asexuality in the pre-internet era, also found casual mentions across the wider LGBTQ+ community over the years. In 1952, for example, the magazine Transvestia claimed that while most trans people are entirely heterosexual, some are also asexual. Later in 1965, they also published a description of what was termed the asexual range, which stated there are persona who simply have a low libido or no sex drive to speak of. Now, there is a difference between a lack of sexual attraction and a lack of sexual desire or libido, but the concept that people could feel outside the world of sexual interest was clearly there, even in these pre-Stonewall spaces. And then the year after the Stonewall riots in 1970, in an article on trans liberation, publication, the Philadelphia newspaper Gay Dealer wrote that trans lib includes transvestites, transsexuals, and hermaphrodites of any sexual manifestation and of all sexes, heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, and asexual. So the term asexual has been around for a long time, a lot longer than you might have first thought, but it seems to have been mostly used in queer and feminist spaces that a lot of people couldn't or wouldn't access. It wasn't until the creation of the internet that asexuality, like many identities and experiences, had the potential to have a cohesive community. In 1997, Zoe O'Reilly published the article My Life as an Amoeba in a webzine, a first-person look at asexuality that caught the attention of many people who felt the same way. She made clear that her experiences were totally separate from the medicalized kind of stereotypes of the past. My spare time isn't spent thinking about how I don't have sex. I just don't bother about the subject at all. It didn't cause her distress in the way a mental illness would do. It was just a part of her. This personal openness then developed through the 2000s when the accessibility of information provided by the internet allowed asexual communities to emerge online, giving people the chance to describe and share their identity and experiences, as well as find others who related. In the early 2000s, AVEN, the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, was created by David J., and the forums and information it provided were a lifeline to many who previously had felt alone. It's also, unsurprisingly, around this time that we start to see asexual representation appear on screen.
In high school, I was excused from gym class with a doctor's note reading, "This boy's groin is a parched wasteland."
Asexual icon.
So we're starting this on-screen timeline, the opposite of strong here, with Sebastian, a sexual icon, a short-lived recurring joke character on The Late Late Show in 2003. It's essentially a series of one-line jokes that are very obviously coming from writers outside of the community with little to no knowledge of actual asexuality. Jokes about his therapist killing himself, being uncomfortable with the word would, punishing himself for sexual thoughts, or not having gone through puberty, for example.
In my opinion, the most erotic film of all time is Tron.
Asexual icon.
It's the kind of humour that I can see being like reappropriated as ironic meme humour by asexual teens in a few years' time. Like, its intentions were clearly not to be representation, but a TikTok of a teen lip syncing to these skits will probably go viral in 2023, and good for them, but it doesn't make a good representation, unfortunately. In 2004, we then got an episode of the Discovery Channel show The Sex Files, dedicated to asexuality. It included such gems as this talking head interview.
People need to have sex to enjoy life.
And an interview with Dr. Patrick Carnes, who is a self-described sexual disorders psychologist, who had this to say.
I hear people make the statement that, well, I don't need sex and I'm unhappy. I'm not unhappy about it. But I find they're suicidal or they're depressed.
They also had a researcher, Dr. Anthony Bogart, who explained that he was studying asexuality, but it was difficult, and particularly in regards to getting a large sample size. But he had found out that asexual people were more likely to be religious and less educated. So, that's fun. No thoughts, just Jesus up here, gang. In 2005, we had the character of Brian in Mysterious Skin, who is described as asexual by another character in the movie. This indie hit based on the Haunting book by Scott Heim follows two boys whose lives are changed by the same traumatic event as children. Brian's aversion to sexual intimacy is heavily suggested to be a result of abuse he suffered as a child, and is in direct contrast to the hypersexuality of the other lead, Neil, a teenage hustler. It's an incredible film, but definitely feels more like it's dealing with the aftermath of abuse rather than asexuality. Those two things are, of course, not mutually exclusive, but in this context, I think that they're implied to be that way. His supposed asexuality is another clue on the path the audience has to take to figure out what happened to these two characters as children. In 2007, we have the character of Gerald Tippett, who's introduced in the New Zealand hospital soap opera Shortland Street.
No, she's my first girlfriend, ever.
And how long have you been in this relationship?
A few months, and we have tried everything. Oh, I won't even begin to tell you of all the problems that has caused, and in fact, it's probably, if anything, it's just turned me off. Look, can you just prescribe me something or what?
A character that Fox has identified as the first sincere asexual character on television. Gerald's sexuality was discovered and explored in several episodes, and he continued to have a full and exciting soap opera life after coming out. He, in a truly relatable queer experience, finds out his identity by basically Googling it. Soap operas are often the first media to pioneer representation, and the use of character using Google searches is actually a pretty good technique to kind of bring the audience along for the ride and explain what he's feeling without it feeling didactic. There's a whole playlist of Gerald's storyline on YouTube, but fair warning, it is true 2000s terrible in terms of its visual audio quality. A few years later, America got their first asexual character, Poppy, in the drama Huge on ABC Family.
I basically identify as asexual.
Oh, wait, what?
It's just how I am.
Vox writer Sarah Gallup described how the short-lived series spares but 1 minute for Poppy coming out, but it's a really good minute, full of vulnerability and overly direct awkwardness. In the scene, Poppy says, "I basically identify as asexual. It's just how I am. I always kept waiting to feel the feelings that everyone else talked about, but I just never got there." And it's framed in a really positive way. She sees the perks of not having to deal with messy relationship issues in a way that subverts the traditional coming out scene tragedy by turning it into something more casual. A couple of years after that, we get the movie The Olivia Experiment in 2012, centered around a 27-year-old grad student who begins to think that she might be asexual.
I guess I'm searching. I think I have an issue with intimacy, so I don't really know what it's like to have a relationship.
With the tagline, a comedy about sexual disorientation. The movie is full of other people doubting that she could be asexual, telling her to live a little, or suggesting sex as a kind of cure, including a friend who offers her own boyfriend up as a potential sexual partner for Olivia to try out. The movie ends in an open-ended kind of way, without a clear answer to whether she now identifies as asexual or not, but the guy she ends up wanting to date seems fine with it either way. The film has been criticised in some asexual circles for its pretty damning portrayal of an asexual support group as depressing and exclusionary, but for many it's an important milestone in asexual representation. In 2012, we also got the infamous episode of House, Better Half, which featured a character who was lying about being asexual so she could marry an asexual man. But plot twist, he wasn't asexual either, he just had a brain tumour. It's classic House shenanigans, but the fact it's one of the few examples of seemingly asexual representation, an identity that's already considered by some to be a medical issue or temporary state, is kind of frustrating.
I have a patient who's asexual.
Is she a giant pool of algae?
It's a valid sexual orientation, according to this article at least.
Yeah, I think I read that too. Was that Fugliness Weekly?
She's perfectly fine looking. Happily married for 10 years.
A guy who loves penis enough for both of them.
In typical House fashion, he makes a bet with Wilson for $100 that he can essentially prove that asexuality isn't real, and is successful in that bet. Even though we have Wilson explaining some facts about asexuality, like being valid and X% of the population are asexual, the fact that House, the arsehole who's always right, doesn't believe in it, kind of renders Wilson's points moot in the eyes of a wider audience. In 2014, Sirens introduced Voodoo, who was probably the first asexual character that I ever heard people talk about in earnest online. Sirens is a comedy show, but didn't play up her asexuality for laughs as much as it kind of poked fun at the character of Brian for being so hopelessly in love with her, and the way that it contrasted how nervous he is around the confidence that she has in her own sexuality.
See, that's the difference between us. You can't get laid. I don't want to.
Well, yeah, I'm sure guys are always hitting on you.
No, they don't. I give off a very distinct vibe.
Which is?
Don't hit on me or I will kill you.
Oh, thank God. I was worried that it was just me.
She's clear about her lack of interest in sex, and he tells her that he doesn't mind, that he just likes spending time with her. That same year, we also had fan favourite Varys in Game of Thrones essentially come out as asexual to Oberyn Martell in a brief exchange.
But I was never interested in girls either.
What then?
Nothing.
Everybody is interested in something.
Not me. When I see what desire does to people, what it's done to this country, I am very glad to have no part in it.
The show makes a distinction between his castration and his lack of sexual desire, clarifying that he has always been asexual. And then later they introduce the character of Grey Worm, another eunuch who does experience sexual desire. Even though the character's sexuality is never really mentioned again, this makes Varys one of the most mainstream depictions of asexuality of all time. And then 3 years after that, in 2017, we get to one of the most well-known asexual characters in television, Todd from BoJack Horseman. His coming out scene is characteristically a mix of humour and heart, and the show continued to explore his asexuality across later seasons too.
I think I'm asexual. Asexual what? Dynamo? Deviant? Harassment lawsuit waiting to happen?
No, asexual, not sexual.
The voice actor of Todd, Aaron Paul, said in 2019, "So many people have been approaching me saying, I didn't know what I was. You've given me a community that I didn't even know existed. Which is just so heartbreaking, but also so beautiful, you know?" I'm going to cover Todd in a lot more detail in the next video, but I think it's really interesting that he is seemingly the most common reason that I see for people outside of the community having even heard of asexuality at all. Representation, it is important. Also in 2017, we have the Shadowhunters character, Rafael Santiago, who tells Isabel Lightwood he's never been interested in sex.
It's not like that. Not like that. I'm just not interested in sex.
Being a vampire made you this way?
No. I've always been like this.
Cassandra Clare didn't mention this in the books, but it was added to the TV show after she talked about her own headcanon for his asexuality on social media. In the next video, I'm going to talk more in depth about the intersections asexuality can have with other identities, but the combination of this stereotypical sexualization of Latin American men with the open asexuality of this character is something that we rarely get to see even in the limited field of representation that we do have. About a year later, the UK got its first asexual character in a soap with Liv in Emmerdale. So I was watching Emmerdale clips on YouTube at the time purely for her brother's gay storyline, but Liv's journey was so amazing to watch alongside it. She'd been on the show for a while before she came out, so had this rich characterization with flaws and issues totally outside of her sexuality. What resulted was a teen girl figuring herself out and having open conversations with her gay sibling and being allowed to be confused and angry but also supported and loved. She tells her friend Jacob she's not interested in sex. Sometimes I feel like I should just give it a try, but then I think no, because it's not me, is it? And I don't think it's just because I've not met the right person or I've not blossomed into a woman yet. I just don't want to. Countering assumptions that as a teenage girl, she just hasn't met the right guy or is too immature to know what she wants. More recently, there was a truly cringe-inducing storyline about a boy whose mum tries to set them up because she thinks that asexual is like a slang term for asexual girl, and that Liv is just very sexual. It leads to them dating anyway, but as with all soaps, it's very on and off again, lots of bumps in the road. But those bumps are mostly nothing to do with Liv's asexuality. When issues around her sexuality do come up, it's specific to Liv and her personality and other experiences and problems, including her self-esteem issues and alcoholism, rather than generic teachable moments about asexuality in general. Then in 2020, there were 2 new asexual characters introduced in the world of web series. Now, I'm mainly talking about TV and movie characters here, but, you know, Critical Role and Dimension 20 get a pass in my mind. So in the world of Critical Role, we had Caduceus Clay, who was confirmed to be both asexual and aromantic in episode 114 of Campaign 2, with him saying that sex is not really his thing.
Yeah, no, it's just not, I get it. It's not really my thing.
Are you just not
Nah, not really.
not into her, or just not into...
Oh, not into anybody. I enjoy what you all have going on. That's a lot of fun to watch. I mean, not there specifically, but, you know, just we all bounce off each other is kind of great. But nah, that's not really for me.
It's not your thing.
No, not my thing.
Taliesin Jaffe, who plays Caduceus, revealed in the post-episode discussion show Talks Machina that he had planned on the character being asexual and aromantic from the beginning, but wanted to wait until an organic time in the story to reveal it. And in Dimension 20's Crown of Candy series, Ali Beardsley, who I've had the pleasure of hosting as a contributor on this channel before, plays Liam Wilhelmina, who came out to his father as asexual on the show.
That's hot.
Liam, you don't know what hot is.
I don't, and I don't wish to. I'm really just looking for love, romance.
In the same year, we also had an asexual character in a show that's all about sex, Florence in Netflix's Sex Education. The show follows a student sex clinic in a school in England run by Otis, the son of an actual sex and relationships therapist, Jean. There are overarching plot lines, but also each episode usually includes a side character with some kind of sex-related problem. Enter Florence, who talks to Jean about not wanting to have sex, fearing that she's broken.
It's sort of like I'm surrounded by a huge feast with everything I could want to eat, but I'm not hungry.
And Jean calmly, professionally, and empathetically introduces her to the term asexuality, reassuring her that not wanting sex doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with her.
Sex doesn't make us whole. And so
How could you ever be broken?
Having asexuality acknowledged in a show based on the idea that teens are all like full of raging hormones and thinking about sex constantly is a really interesting inclusion. However, Florence hasn't reappeared in the show in the 3rd season and wasn't a huge part of the season she was in. I'll talk a bit more about the show's missed potential later in this video. And then in 2021, and it is truly wild to me that this was only this year, Everything's Gonna Be Okay gave us a character of Drea. This heartfelt comedy is a bit of a sleeper here. It revolves around Nicholas, a man who unexpectedly becomes the guardian of his 2 teen half-sisters, Matilda and Genevieve. It's been praised for putting queerness front and centre and for starring autistic actors in lead roles as autistic characters. One such autistic character is Drea, Matilda's girlfriend, who comes out as asexual during the show. Having an autistic character be ace without it becoming this awful stereotypical like autistic people are just different and don't understand emotions and are awkward and their savant genius means that they just don't have time for love or sex is like pretty revolutionary.
I actually don't think I'm sexually attracted to anyone.
What do you mean?
I mean, I enjoyed doing it because it made me feel close to you, but not as close as when I would hug you or I'd watch you practice playing piano.
And finally, this year, we had Greta in Generation, a short-lived HBO dramedy about a group of high school students exploring their sexuality and identities. The show co-creator Zelda Barnes explained, "We want to explore this idea of a couple in which one member is asexual. Greta is still learning how to talk about the fact that she's asexual and learning what that means for her, and she doesn't quite know what she wants yet. We want to dive into how Greta will handle this realization about her identity." Although her asexuality had been hinted at through the show, it wasn't until the show finale that she more openly explained to her love interest.
I can like someone, like really like them, but when it comes to kissing or making out or whatever, I don't want that. Oh, so I don't know how it could work, like, between us, even if you wanted it to.
Okay, so that timeline was, let's be honest, pretty sparse in the grand scheme of things. It's only in the last few years that we've seen ace representation increase. It's therefore perhaps not surprising that asexual viewers have also pointed out missed opportunities over the years, characters who skated around the edges of asexuality but never really hit the mark, or seemed to back out at the last minute, or stories where the potential complexities and experiences of asexuality would have made the plot that much more interesting, but weren't included. Like, for example, there's the whole genre of sex comedies, which have pretty much all missed the opportunity to include asexuality in an interesting, casual and funny way. Movies like The 40-Year-Old Virgin, American Pie, The To-Do List and Superbad all center around characters basically being pressured into desiring sex, coached into having it, or driven entirely by the idea that they should be wanting it as the be-all and end-all of our happy life, because otherwise you must be weird or desperate or incomplete, right? What would it look like for this kind of movie to acknowledge that some people just aren't interested? What would a meta-commentary about the absurdity of over-sexualized characters look like? I asked on Twitter for people to send me examples of asexual characters, and a lot of people responded with examples that I already had on the timeline. Characters who used the word asexual and were like explicit representation. But a lot of other people mentioned characters who described something that sounded like asexuality, or just gave people asexual vibes, or made ace people feel seen, even if that wasn't the intention of the writers. This second kind of character is frustrating because it seems like such a missed opportunity. It's there, but it's not really there. The aunt character Miranda from Princess Sid, for example, gave off such strong asexual vibes to me that I messaged the writer of the movie to see if that was his intention, and he replied, "Not completely, but I'm extremely open to that interpretation. Lots of intentionally conflicting textures in the original conception, a tendency towards asexuality being one. A lot going on inside Miranda." Miranda's this famous novelist who has her somewhat precocious teenage niece stay with her for the summer, taking her to creative house parties she attends with a circle of writer friends and generally trying to relate to this girl who is headstrong and outgoing, especially in regards to sex and relationships. There's this scene where Sid makes this really rude offhand comment, "Maybe if you had sex, you wouldn't want to eat all the time," before immediately apologizing. But Miranda gives her this speech about how fulfillment and joy come from different places for different people.
It is not a handicap to have one thing but not another. To be one way and not another. We are different shapes and ways, and our happiness is unique. There are no rules of balance.
And it would have been the perfect spot for her to have said she was ace. Like, I was honestly surprised the writer didn't reply to me like, yeah, obviously she's ace, didn't you watch the movie? But that's part of the reason why I have such specific guidelines for what counts as genuine and intentional representation for me. Now, I couldn't talk about missed opportunities without talking about the CW iconic teen show Riverdale, which portrays characters from the Archie comics and was the perfect opportunity to include asexual representation in the character of Jughead Jones. The comics have been running for many years before the show started airing, and the official confirmation of Jughead's asexuality in comic canon came in 2015, 2 years before Riverdale the show began airing. And the writers of the show were absolutely aware of Jughead's sexuality in the comics. Roberto Aguirre Sacasa, who is chief creative creator of the comic and series developer of the show, has said, "I think all the kids are discovering themselves, and a big part of that is discovering their sexuality, their sexual selves. Rather than have everything fully formed, for instance, we're not going to start with Jughead's asexuality or any of the things that have become canon." This kind of just you wait, we aren't saying it's never going to happen, wink wink nudge nudge attitude from showrunners, especially with how rare it is to see sexual representation on screen at all, feels lacking to say the least. Especially because 5 seasons in, that supposed promise of Jughead discovering his sexuality has yet to come. And it's not just characters who have a canonical basis in asexuality who have been surrounded by speculation. Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, a show that I'm sure that no one expected me to ever talk about on this channel, falls into that category of not quite representation. Like, the word was never said, but for a lot of people the vibes were very much there. Sheldon is a scientist with a genius level IQ who is unabashedly nerdy and egotistical. His interest in academia was portrayed in contrast to his 3 fellow scientists who are much more concerned with women, sex and relationships. A lot of viewers saw elements of asexuality in his character, and it wasn't just the audience who noticed. The other characters did as well. In season 2, after seeing Sheldon have dinner with a grad student who appears to have a crush on him, the other characters in the show, Penny, Leonard, Raj and Howard, all of whom are shocked, go out in the hall to give them some privacy. Penny asks them,
"What's his deal? Is it girls, guys, sock puppets?"
Honestly, we've been operating under the assumption that he has no deal.
This conversation ends with an interesting example of a trope that I'm going to go more into in the next video, the asexual as non-human trope.
I believe one day Sheldon will eat an enormous amount of Thai food and split into 2 Sheldons.
On the other hand, I think Sheldon might be the larval form of his species, and someday he'll spin a cocoon and emerge 2 months later with moth wings and an exoskeleton.
However, this seeming lack of sexuality, rather than developing into a genuine piece of ace representation, is instead retconned to have sex be part of a sympathetic or humanizing storyline for Sheldon in later seasons. He begins dating fellow scientist Amy, a character who is not portrayed as asexual, but whose desire to have sex is instead part of a reasonably tiresome trope where the frumpy woman having desire and libido is seen as inherently comical. Eventually, the two have sex as a birthday present to Amy. In the show, Sheldon says,
"Intimacy in any form has been challenging for me, but I'd like to show her how important she is, and it feels like now might be the right time."
Sheldon, that's so beautiful.
Then it's settled. Amy's birthday present will be my genitals.
Which implies that it's not sex itself that Sheldon is interested in, but what it means to Amy. After they have sex, Sheldon says, "I like that more than I thought I would," and he and Amy agree to have sex once a year on her birthday. Many asexual people choose to have sex with their partners for a variety of reasons, so this act in and of itself doesn't stop Sheldon from being asexual, but the show never explicitly goes there. Okay, let's talk about Netflix's Sex Education, because I promised I would, and also this is a hill that I am willing to die on. As I mentioned in the timeline, they did have an asexual character in Florence who appeared as a supporting character for a handful of episodes in season 2. But for a show about the complexities of relationships and sex, having one side character in a neatly wrapped up coming out storyline feels like meh to me. Especially because they seem to provide us with the perfect main asexual character to explore this in Otis. Otis is the lead of the show, a teenage son of a sex therapist. In season 1, it's revealed that he doesn't masturbate, and his eventual attempts to have sex for the first time lead to him panicking and not going through with it. He's very intellectually knowledgeable about sex, but it kind of felt for a lot of that first season like it wasn't something that he necessarily wanted or would enjoy. A lot of viewers were hoping that his journey would kind of culminate in him accepting himself for being asexual, and the show would allow for storylines about how that might affect his potential romantic relationships going forwards. It would have been a great way of exploring the difficulties in working out how you feel about sex and attraction as a young person surrounded by peers who are obsessed with it. Instead, it was written off as a symptom of trauma after seeing his father treat on his mother as a child, and season 2 opens with a prolonged sequence of Otis enjoying his own company, which is clearly meant to establish that he has no more issues on that front or any other in regards to sex. Another entry into the not explicitly canon asexual category is Orlo in recent historical comedy show The Great, an occasionally true story about Catherine the Great. Count Orlo appears to be loosely based on, or at least named after, Count Gregory Orlov, one of Catherine the Great's lovers. However, the show goes to great length to establish that there is nothing romantic or sexual going on between Orlo and Catherine. Early in the season, Catherine attempts to seduce him, and Orlo is horrified.
You've caught my eye. Oh, thank you, I'm flattered. Shall we read? Is there anything you want? I'm fine. Come and get it. Oh my God, you are trying to seduce me.
Instead, they form a complicated and deep friendship and allyship. In the show, Orlo is called Orlo the Virgin by courtiers. Emperor Peter in particular mocks him for his lack of sexual activity, in one scene forcing him to mime masturbation. In a show that gives almost everyone a love interest, Orlo shows no romantic or sexual attraction to anyone. The court of Peter III is hypersexual in the show. People are just basically going at it just all the time everywhere, and Orlo just seems to find it exhausting. Like, he just wants to pass some reforms, you know? What makes Orlo a potentially brilliant bit of asexual representation is that the joke is never at the expense of Orlo's lack of sexual desire. In the attempted seduction scene, for example, we the audience are clearly meant to cringe at Catherine, who is drunk, awkward, and vomiting oysters. Whenever Peter mocks Orlo, we don't laugh with Peter, we laugh or cringe at Peter's callousness. And finally, we couldn't talk about missed opportunities without talking about Star Trek. Spock is, in many ways, a very ace-coded character. His lack of sexual desire is consistently contrasted against Kirk's bravado and romantic confidence. Spock is part of an alien species, being half Vulcan, that prioritizes restraint and suppressed emotions and passions. The attitude towards sex are interesting, to say the least, with Spock experiencing something called Pon farr. He basically, for lack of a better phrase, goes through heat and needs to have sex with a woman or he will die. Yeah, I know, don't question it.
I'd hoped I would be spared this. But the ancient drives are too strong. Eventually they catch up with us. We are driven by forces we cannot control. Return home. Take a wife.
Outside of Pon farr, which is portrayed as a psychologically distressing time for Spock that makes him act out of character, Spock seemingly shows no sexual desire in the original series. Star Trek actually has like a number of other characters who fall into this spectrum. Again, not to be a tease, but I am going to talk about them, including like Data, for example, in the next video as well. But I'll talk about just like one more example here. So in the episode The Apple, Kirk and his crew beam down to a planet that's occupied by the Valians, a seemingly completely asexual species. Spock actually gets a pretty good moment of like asolidarity where he argues that the Valians have a valid identity, saying, "You insist on applying human standards to non-human cultures. I remind you that humans are only a tiny minority in this galaxy. These people are healthy and they are happy. Whatever you choose to call it, this system works, despite your emotional reaction to it." But that's completely undermined by the implication that their asexuality is due to their mental enslavement by a computer god named Val that keeps the Valians in this kind of childlike state, tying their asexuality to this sort of enslaved innocence. The episode ends with the Valians being freed of Val and presumably of their asexuality as well. What now? So through the sort of awkward, lacking or inaccurate portrayals that crop up around asexuality, I think three main areas of stereotypical messaging kind of begin to emerge. So one, that asexuality is a temporary condition and not a valid sexuality. This might mean seemingly asexual characters end up being cured, labelled as immature or confused, or left out of representation altogether. Two, people who think they might be asexual are either lying and or somehow confused by their feelings and desires. They just need the right person to come along. This might see characters growing out of their lack of attraction or lying to themselves in an act of self-denial. And 3, asexuality is a problem because it's a barrier to sex and romance, which are seen as necessities for a fulfilling life. This might mean characters' kind of main source of suffering in life is their asexuality, which they need to compromise to be truly happy. This is the kind of messaging that we get all the time from mainstream culture's constant focus on romantic and sexual relationships as fundamentally important. The idea then being that the person or character who pulls away from that supposed central part of being truly happy and alive must be missing something or broken in some way. These underlying assumptions about what it means to be asexual then trickle down into how asexual characters are portrayed on screen, even when writers don't seem to be aware of what they're doing. This is then shown to us, the audience, and this misinformed depictions then continue to be fed into public consciousness in the kind of never-ending cycle. And so the question is, where do we go from here? What does the future of asexual representation look like? While the rate of on-screen depictions has increased over the past few years, it still feels in many ways stagnant. We've not yet reached the point where the phrase "I am asexual" is universally understood in the mainstream, not just so asexual people can see themselves in these characters, but for the audience at large to be introduced to a side of LGBTQ+ representation that might be new to them. With only around 2 decades or so of asexual characters on screen, we're still very much in the early era of this representation. The chances that shows would kick the ball out of the park the first time were pretty slim, and we can see that in a lot of the examples in this video and beyond. Hopefully, as asexual representation continues its upward trajectory, we can get to a point where seeing asexual characters is more of a common occurrence across all genres, to give us a chance to explore the diverse and differing experiences of asexuality that exist in the real world. Thank you very much for watching. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a follow-up video to this, which will include some kind of like ace-coded characters that maybe you were like, where were they in this video? Like Sherlock. We're also going to have a look at specific tropes like the asexual alien trope, the asexual villain trope, the lack of diversity and intersectionality within these portrayals, all kinds of good stuff. So yeah, if you aren't already subscribed and you've gotten this far in the video, just press the subscribe button and you'll get that video in your sub box very soon. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, if you would like to support my work, one of the best ways of doing so is through Patreon. I will leave a link in the description along with all my social media so you can find me all over the internet. And until I see you next time, bye. Okay, if anyone is still here, the video is technically ended, but because you're still here, you get a little treat. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed I have a mic now. I mean, I had a mic previously. It was just like attached to my camera far away. This is a fancy mic. I guess this is what being a full-time YouTube person looks like. Also, I'm still in the same chair, but the background is different. It's because I've moved flats. And as such, this entire room is just full of boxes. And so this beautiful frame of like put togetherness is an absolute lie, which I will show you now. If I turn the camera slightly, yeah, those shelves have nothing else on them except the books that are in shot. And these books are obviously like facing the wrong way. Like you don't put books up on shelves like that. The shelves face the other way. It's all a lie. And finally, new video is coming out in just 2 weeks instead of my usual 4, and it's tentatively titled "The Surprisingly Radical Politics of the Purge Movies," which is like a little special October Halloween-y special. So yeah, look forward to that. Okay, bye-bye.